First time legitimately posting anything of substance, this is the first thing I came up with. Before this begins, I must engage in some forethought, a prequel, if you will. I am not an ambassador to any species in the Federation. I am rather just a scientist. I collate data mostly, observe species behavior, and collect data on evolutionary and cultural practices to hand over to ambassadors and politicians. The data they use is then collected and sent out to various parties within the 9 galaxies and the Federation as a whole in order to determine the value of new species to the galaxy. Primarily, they are used to determine a species' strengths, weaknesses, value to economy, and potential risks associated with allowing them to join us. The lifespan of my species lasts 700 years. When I got this specific contract, I was but 112 years old, still barely a teenager by my own species standards. I had several commissions before, but none of which could have possibly prepared me for this. The species was, as we all have come to know them, were the humans. A strange species by most standards, tall, gaunt, heavily built from a high-gravity world. And much like the rest of us, a very normal history saturated in blood and gold. The humans took us by surprise with the sheer resilience they showed, and despite the fact they were shorter than a Gargrani by a clear meter, tests we conducted on volunteers showed that they could match them for muscle and speed. Intellect was highly variable, and with training and proper education, each member of the species had the potential to become super geniuses, much like the Federation's scientists, the Saranai. Perhaps even greater. During this commission, I received the reports of various efforts to watch and catalog the species. As I later learned, we had been watching them for more than 8 centuries. Within the last 2.5 centuries, they had accomplished more technological advancement than any other species in the galaxy, faster and more variable than any other species we had encountered. During the commission, we were at the point where we were about to actually introduce ourselves. Political turmoil on the planet's surface had somewhat simmered out. Most nations were busily engaged with the prospect of dwindling resources, ecological failure, and a looming energy crisis. Political subversion was shelved, and although most nations still hated each other, they were better focused on resolving their rapidly growing problems. We were going to say hello the traditional way, as our diagrams, simulations, and decades of study had surmised. We appear in a large enough ship, hovering within range of their space stations and satellites, then broadcast a message. Once done, we give them time to calm down, process the information, and as a sign of friendship, supply them with our energy or resource production technology, or maybe a cure for a virulent disease. After a time, we tell them there's a wider galaxy out there and supply them the terms to join us. It always worked. 7,000 years of civilization and the Federation spread across 9 galaxies proved it to work. They had problems. We had solutions. We were willing to supply this solution if they were willing to negotiate peacefully. It always worked. Granted, it was still a year away from our welcoming party, but Ambassador Sharkan, a member of the gaunt, blue-skinned beast races known as the Shadakai, was adamant that we could pull it off quite easily. He would have been right, if not for that day. I remember it, scarred into my brain. Even thought the ship was cloak-shielded to hide us and all signatures. The entire star system felt the thunderous ripple of that day. The Sarajevo incident, as the humans called it. I was sitting quietly at my computer desk, looking over dozens of files, when a blaring series of alarms blasted through the ship. Abnormal radiation readings, psionic cascade warnings, alarms of system power downs. I thank whatever gods exist that the cloaking system remained active, but our engines were silenced for 7 hours. Then we looked. A small peninsula in a country called Italy was now a smoldering ruin. Near the city of Sarajevo now stood a billowing, menacing cloud of purple and blue. The clouds around the area for 500 miles around had parted, as if a nuclear bomb had gone off. Most of the surrounding area looked as though it had either spontaneously combusted or simply vanished. We were astonished. We calculated that a bare minimum of 400 million humans were lost in that moment. We spent the next few days running frantic scans, intercepting transmissions. Some members of the crew were receiving reports of suffering on an unimaginable scale and demanding we call in reinforcements to assist. Wisely, the ambassador and the ship's captain refused and said they needed more evidence of what the hell was going on to allow for a direct intervention. He was right, of course, as the old warmongers of the world's nations immediately started whipping into a frenzy, blaming anyone they could. Then 2 days later, we detected it. It was a psionic signature of immeasurable power, coming from what was left of Italy. It was so stupidly potent, it blew out half of our sensor array. We were blind to what was going on for weeks. One of the star system's gas giants, named Jupiter, turned a sickening shade of red and pink as a response to it. Lor Khan, the ambassador of the Coronat people, a well-established race of telepaths, was in her quarters when the psionic event occurred. She collapsed in agony, weeping like she had just lost all hope and reason. It took 7 men to restrain her, and no less than 8 doses of anti-psionic neural blockers to get her to calm down. All the ambassadors and captain agreed an intervention was needed at this point. We tried a week later to restart the scanner arrays that test for psionic entities or telepathic species such as gestalts or hive minds. We detected a measly number of barely 834 such individuals. But each one had the collective psionic power of 500,000 Coronat, and the Coronat were the most powerful psionics in the galaxy. The scanners short-circuited with the sheer amount of data hurled into them to the point we burned them out completely, and we had to return to shipyard in order to replace them. We were so busy with our own affairs, we had missed 3 weeks' worth of news and events. By this point, a full-scale invasion of 20 million men was underway in the Italian peninsula. The psionic storm caused all sorts of entities to spew forth from the ether, and the Corono was now frantically screaming for us to stop them. This put us in a bad spot. We had seen this before. When a species attains a modicum of psionic abilities, they can cause random and uncontrolled genetic mutations among various creatures leading to a very hostile war, drive millions to a blistering insanity, and turn those not strong enough to resist into creatures similar to the undead. Communications across the planet were nothing short of staggering. 100 different languages and dialects, interspersed with direct translations as millions of armed men poured into the stricken nation's borders, with tens of thousands dying to electromagnetic storms and psionic distortion waves before ever hitting the ground. What followed was a bloody, merciless 17-month-long war that saw a grand total of 7 million soldiers dead. And what emerged from that war? Them. 2 years after the Sarajevo incident, we revealed ourselves. A fleet of battle cruisers, flagships, dreadnoughts, and frigates, one from each of the Federation's 187 star nations, appeared in the star system. Within moments of the star jump, every Coronat on every ship became agitated or wary, and took several minutes to calm down and learn how to block the psychic noise coming from the planet's surface. We took note and saw that the area around the nation of Italy was still in a state equivalent to that of a bomb crater. Scans revealed no background radiation or local population. A strange occurrence. The entire country was abandoned. The introduction was strained at best. But once the humans figured out we were here for explicitly peaceful reasons, their armies backed off and negotiations began. We first introduced them to the Fleet Admiral Konoha of the Asahi species, Ambassador Sharakan, Ambassador Olari, the same Coronat that witnessed the psionic storm, and finally Grand Admiral Urias of the Tanomi species. All were creatures roughly similar to human appearance, stature, and strengths, all to help give the humans a means of familiarity. It is a simple tactic, and in this case it worked well. Within a few hours of negotiations, we were in the process of exchanging information and organizing a face-to-face meeting. When a meeting was finally organized a week later, most ships in the fleet, purely there for aesthetics and security, had left for other places for different reasons, leaving our ship, a few escorts, and one of the dreadnoughts behind. The humans chose by public vote and 5 people to represent them in the Federation, or at least for the entry period. We came on board one of their stations as a sign of trust, and we spent most of our time translating languages and exchanging information. I was there, handling the data. The humans were strangely delightful to be around. The array of scents coming from each of them were quite the challenge to overcome for my enhanced olfactory senses. They wore different garb, the females' garments flowing and loose, the males' garments of militaristic or business style, each from a different aspect of society, as I could surmise. I, however, had a question. In the middle of our negotiations, I asked them, "Pardon me, but is there not supposed to be 5 ambassadors here? There are only 4 and a few technicians." They looked at each other, their visages suddenly suffering a chemical reaction that drained the blood from their faces. It was a look of both pride and terror. Well, he had, familial obligations. He begs us to excuse his lack of presence. I smiled, baring my teeth just like they did. They nervously smiled back, probably because my teeth were a bit sharper and more numerous. Okay, let's hope he feels better then. Apologies for my interruption. No further mention of the 5th ambassador was made that day. A week passed and allowed both sides to do some research, compare notes, and refine the translation algorithms for local dialects and languages. Stuff I usually had to do anyway, so I was right at home, listening to reports while the ambassadors chattered among each other. A month passed, and finally the 5th ambassador arrived with the others, and by all the galaxies. To say we were astonished would be the understatement of the millennium, just like a human in appearance, but the sheer energy radiating from him was enough to drive a Klaxian horde to pacifism. And that is not a joke. He stood in front of us, 6 feet high, clad in heavy armor, a cloak and a mask of highly ornate design that he had apparently made himself. The usual human appendages, 2 legs, 2 feet, clad in heavy armor from what we could see. 2 arms held out in front of him in front his chest, hidden by the long sleeves of his brown cloak. The 2 things that made him differ from his fellows were those eyes and those blades. Jutting from his back were a set of 2 long bony appendages like the wing bones of a bird, articulate to a ludicrous degree, 8 feet in span, and each tipped with a long scythe-like blade that could easily slice a starship's hull open. They were that sharp. Those eyes still haunt me to this day, piercing, bright golden eyes. His voice sounded similar to his fellow humans, though. I could, however, sense a certain level of apprehension and underlying regret. I could tell just by looking at him, as the humans would say. He's seen some shit. He's seen some real shit. The introduction was similar to the other humans. Traditional human greetings of hello, handshakes, and various other customs, but the entire time he kept those blades brandished, as if he was expecting something, as if he was ready to attack. It was only several hours after the greeting banquet started that he seemingly lowered his guard. Everyone made a very clear effort to avoid eye contact, as did he. I was there at the banquet. My technical skills and gathering of data allowed me to become the prime choice for interactions with the ambassadors and admirals. I quite enjoyed the humans. They were fun to be around. First time in my life I had ever been interested to be around another species, more than I did my computing equipment, really. Then he spoke. His name was simply Fade. Nothing else. Unusual for a human, who usually have a few names attached to each person. So, I can sense there's something you are not quite telling us. We were a bit apprehensive, to say the least. Oh, what makes you say that? We have been fully upfront with you this whole time. Fleet Admiral Konoha replied, a measure of assertiveness in his tone. And he was right. Full transparency was the way we did things, and it always worked before. Does that mean you were not here 18 months ago? Two of the humans momentarily stopped eating, their faces once again pale, and Grand Admiral Urias gulped audibly out of nervousness. Well, Quickly realizing where this was going, I blurted out the answer. Yes, we were. I was on that very ship myself when it happened. Sadly, the problems the incident caused were too numerous for us to attempt an intervention. Engine failure, short circuits, overloading scanners. As much as all of us wanted to, there was not anything we could do to help at the time. But my question, if I may ask, is, how did you know? We could hear her screams, he said, looking directly at the ambassador from Corino that was there that day, even though she was 30 kilometers away on board the dreadnought. All of us could tell by the sudden sense of tension that washed over us. Even though they were miles apart, between meters-thick starship hulls, they could see each other clear as they were standing face to face. It was right about here that we realized just how powerful these new psionics were. Not simply telepaths or potent scions, it was here we realized how devastating that event was, how this tiny little backwater planet could produce a devastating psionic blast of that size. It was at this point we dared to breathe a sigh of relief because we knew how few of them there were. The human known as Fade spent several months with the ambassador team before he completed his task and returned to the planet's surface. What began after that was a 50-year period of humans colonizing, intermixing, breeding, spreading, and being welcomed with open arms by the rest of the galaxy. An unparalleled and unforeseen period of exceptional trade, diplomacy, and technological advancement, spurned by humanity's insatiable desire to excel, followed in that wake. I calculated that because of the humans, the Federation's overall level of technology increased by 500 years on in the space of barely 40. New star drives developed, new quantum computing systems developed, and due to human greed, as egregious as it could be, brought riches and power to star systems previously thought worthless or impoverished. During that time, we saw just how fucking dangerous they were. One incident occurred during a trade dispute between a few species over the mining rights to a system with 7 gas giants, all rich with spice and other mineral wealth. Each of 7 species refused to back down. It inevitably came to blows. But he came to that battle, and it was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. 7 separate fleets had gathered in this one star system, each laying their claim to a gas giant and several others. Bullets started flying, tempers flared, and eventually we were watching an open exchange of heavy cannon fire and plasma volleys. The system filled with bright flares of blue, purple, and green laser fire, the occasional stray kinetic shell bouncing off of our escort ship's armor. No serious damage was being done in spite of the light show. They knew better than to draw blood while we were watching them. Then a human fleet appeared, fully crewed with but 4 ships, 2 cruisers, 1 torpedo frigate, escorting one of humanity's most dangerous weapons, a carrier. It was a very new concept, but one that would quickly prove to be a devastating tactic. A blaring noise blanketed all frequencies, coming over every broadcast frequency in the system. Dear idiots, your ridiculous conflict threatens the safety of the Federation. As consequence for your actions, the Human Alliance will be seizing control of this star system. You will disengage immediately. This is not negotiable. The absolute durasteel balls of these humans, the sheer audacity of their proclamation, caused the fleets to cease fire, momentarily at least. The admiral of one of the fleets, a Tyrannian by the name of Okul, broadcasted a response on the lines of, "Go fuck yourself, human," and resumed his attack on a Sharrock fleet. It was at this very moment I saw what was casually standing on the very front of the carrier out in the open, sitting pretty just above one of its few defense guns. Him. Fade. I used a telescopic sensor to zoom in on a simple nod given by the fleet admiral on board the human ship to Fade, sitting in his spot. He raised his hands, and his eyes began to glow a mercilessly blinding gold, as if a pair of suns had just awoken in his eye sockets. One ship from each fleet suddenly stopped, engines at full blast, but no movement. Then slowly, inexorably, mercilessly, we could all see that each ship was slowly being crushed. Moments seemed like hours as we watched the event unfold, as 8 fully crewed starships were squished into a clump of metal as if being gripped by a giant invisible hand. Within 2 minutes of giving the order, Fade had used his psionic abilities to completely crush 7 ships, 2 cruisers, 2 destroyers, a battlecruiser, and 2 corvettes, now slowly drifting clumps of partially molten metal. All 7 fleets immediately disengaged their attacks, opened comms to surrender, and began retreating from the system. We made sure to check on the crews of those ships, ignoring what the humans did and focused on collecting survivors. All members of every crushed ship was alive in various escape pods, picked up either by us or the human fleet. No lives were lost, and a devastating border conflict was stopped dead. All because of the audacity of one man and the near-god-like strength of another. Humanity, ever the peacemaker, reminded the 7 rivals of Fade's power, and brokered a trade deal between all 7 factions, ultimately setting up one of the single most prosperous trade stations in the sector, fueled by the gas giants and molten world the system had. As it turned out, the oceanic world was rife for use for fishing and aquatic agriculture, and the many aquatic species in the Federation jumped at the chance, and the system quickly became a gold mine for the 7 factions. The riches from human generosity spurned the dissolution of each faction and the formation of a new compact. The Federation almost instantly granted this new compact membership and opened trade routes they could never have dreamed of. Of course, situations like this were not commonplace, but the humans' ever-present audacity continued to surprise us. More so, their capacity for duty, honor, and loyalty. By the point of this incident, known as the Arakar skirmishes, humanity had cemented itself as an integral part of the Federation, and their home world was now a well-known galactic tourist attraction. The Sons of Sarajevo, as I now knew Fade was called, were a vanishingly rare breed, with barely 7 of their number serving beyond their home world. We had come into contact recently with a species of hive mind, known as the Korrigani. An extremely hostile, all-devouring swarm of insectoids with a need to feed, stripping any planet of its biomass. They came into contact with a group of Eridani, Bakari, Solustine, and Rayet species that colonized an agricultural world. Casualties were in the thousands by the time any word of it reached the Federation. Humanity heard of it before anyone else, and before the Federal Council was even alerted to the situation. A human alliance and Bakari compact fleet were already responding with invading armies. Tens of thousands of humans and Bakari swarmed the battlefields, cutting off the hive mind's invasion forces just before the swarm devoured a city of 60,000. Without their scions, humans were just as vulnerable as any other species, but by the gods, without them. Thousands of humans perished in the ensuing chaos, not to win a fight, but rather to allow civilians. Bakari, significantly more formidable than humans with their 8-foot stature and scaled armor plating, took far less losses in the ensuing fighting. The fighting continued until every last civilian was evacuated. The humans had to bark at the Bakari to get them to stop their advance. Bakari were an extremely proud warrior caste species that valued honor above their lives, and so took a lot of convincing to evacuate the battlefield when the civilians were safe. 7,874 of 12,800 humans perished. Of the 2,000 Bakari sent down, barely 200 returned to their ships. It was at this point the humans busied themselves organizing refugee shelters and other plans, while the Bakari's fleet began to systematically glass the planet's surface. Once the Federation learned of this, war was declared against the hive mind. The war that followed was short and spicy, but not unlike most hive wars. 27 planets reduced to smoldering, irradiated ashlands, 12 planets bombarded to hell to stop the hive from growing, 2 planets virus-bombed, and 1 planet cracked open and thrown into its parent star. Considering the wars of the past, this was but a mild irritation. At the end, the Human Alliance and the Bakari Compact were given full accolades for saving so many lives and effectively spearheading the war and wiping out 2 more planets before the Federation fleet was properly mobilized for a response. Humanity paid dearly, 10 times more than the Bakari, but each and every one of them said that without hesitation, they would gladly do it again. It has been 500 years since the Sarajevo incident, and life has never been better for anyone. We are close to achieving the 200th anniversary of our first ever golden age, as the humans call it. The celebration was especially poignant owing to our choice to start colonizing another galaxy. I was on an observation station above the federal capital when I saw him. I had just helped myself to a buffet during the celebrations and was about to start consuming 3 times my weight in delicious food when I spotted him sitting at an observation deck. We had spoken together and even had a few adventures over the centuries, despite our vastly different jobs and titles, but shared a common ground. We all wanted to succeed and grow, regardless of the odds. So seeing him here at the most momentous of occasions was definitely a heartwarming moment. I walked up to him, as if I had known him as an old friend. "Fade? Is that you?" He looked up at me with tired eyes. Those haunting, tired, golden eyes. "Oh, my, ain't this a small universe? Good to see you again, dude." He smiled upon recognizing my face. "Yes, indeed, may I?" I gestured to the seat next to him. He moved over and smiled at the sight of the Federation's new Alpha Centauri colonization fleet. "Beautiful sight, isn't it? Just beautiful." "It is. Hard to believe we came so far in such a short time." I was led to believe, however, that humans did not live for more than 200 years. "How are you still here after a half-millennium?" I asked quizzically as I took a seat next to him and marveled at the sight of a new era dawning before my very eyes. He scoffed, smiling, but scoffed. "Pfft. Age. That is a human concept. With what happened at Sarajevo, I would very likely outlive the galaxy." I looked at him, astonished. "Wait, what?" He looked at me with a smile. "The psionic wave connected me so deeply to the Ethereum. It stopped my biological processes, mutated me. Us. It so deeply changed us that we are as far from human as you could possibly get, without changing much. In all likelihood, after this galaxy dissipates into nothing, we will likely be what is left." "How is that even possible? How could that much power accumulate so much?" Knowing the truth, I was aghast. Were they now gods? Fuck if I know. Perhaps it was just one of those things. A simple trick, a strange circumstance, a direct intervention of gods, maybe? Or perhaps the universe we live in saw an opportunity and took it, and here we are. He laughed openly, grabbing a glass bottle full of an alcoholic beverage called lager, and handed it to me. "So, you still do not know what happened that day? Even after all this time?" I was kind of hoping for some answers, truth be told. I found it all so fascinating. Mass death and destruction not included, of course. I chuckled nervously at that last statement. No, never figured out why. Many theories, no evidence. After a few decades of trying, we decided it would be a better idea not to think about it. Sarajevo is now a memorial site, and we have a bright future ahead of us. Frankly, Can't say, I care anymore. I have what I want right here. He smiled and gestured to the viewing port. We sat together in silence for several minutes, just admiring the view. I finally spoke up. Since you have this much power, might I ask a question? He looked at me, still with that sneaky smile humans have sometimes. What does it all mean? He guessed my question exactly. Can't say I was surprised. He could read my mind after all. He was a psionic. Well, yes. The galaxy. The Federation. All of it. He chuckled. No idea. But here is what I choose it to be. I choose it to be about this. He said, pointing at the celebration and jubilation of our greatest achievement. Prosperity, friendship, hardship, freedom, power, humility, to have the power of a god and do only what needs to be done. Truth be told, it has no meaning. Galaxies will form, rise, fall. Empires will form, rise, fall. It's all just empty nothingness, as is the universe. It has neither meaning nor purpose. He said, throwing his hands up to the viewing port. Oh. I was a bit saddened. Was it really all for nothing? But that's very fucking depressing. It is our belief that the purpose of life is to make the universe have a meaning, to outlive it. Then when it finally ends, break it, remake it, rewrite it, give it meaning. Our purpose is to etch our names into the stones of history that one day when it's all over and time to start again, we will be there, not as observers, but as the scribes of a new definition of life. Don't you see? He paused, stretched out his blades, and opened his arms in a grand gesture. There is no meaning to life, the universe, and everything, because we have not yet made one. There is no God, because we have not yet taken our place in the heavens. There is no truth, because we have not yet defined it. There is no reason, because we have not yet created one. Our job is to do just that. He smiled, the biggest smile a human could smile, as he noticed the sudden shock of what I just heard. I sat quiet for a few minutes, processing this information. We could do that? Then I considered the raw, ridiculous power of the sons of Sarajevo and thought maybe, just maybe, this was the greatest chance we could ever have of doing something so profound. We had the chance to rewrite the laws of existence. A chance. However stupidly, atomically small that chance was, to change the very fabric of reality, never doomed to insignificance, to sacrifice myself on an altar of my own design, to guarantee the next universe that is born, has it right, has it fast, and can do so much more than any of us ever could conceive of. To become a god, then sacrifice it all to provide the perfect place for the cycle to go again, except this time, without the hardship, without the madness and insanity, no ridiculous cult worshipping, no extragalactic exterminators, none of it. We will actually have a reason that extends beyond anything. Hope for a future beyond comprehension. The next time, we will know what to do. And when we get to where we are now in the next cycle, by the gods, imagine the possibilities. I snapped out of it and looked at him, a sudden drive overcoming me, a drive to greatness I never thought existed. He was looking at me, blade brandished with the tip of his left scythe appendage looming over my open half-drunk beer bottle. On the very tip of that blade was a single drop of thick slime-like golden fluid, waiting to drip into the container under it. In spite of the power of the sons of Sarajevo, there are still too few of us. The universe is really, really, really goddamn big. Luckily, the universe comes pre-installed with a thing known as free will, and we can ask others. The blade gently dipped, and the gold drop gave a wet plop as it disappeared into the glass container. To join us, by choice, and choice alone. In spite of the fact they all are fully aware that they will essentially plant a grand tree, under whose shade they shall never sit. By choice, and choice alone. I was being offered the chance to join the most powerful psionics in the known universe. I was being given the chance to do a greater quality of good than I could have possibly imagined. I was being given the chance to change the universe for the better, even though I knew full well the consequences. I looked at the bottle, the liquid inside changing color to a bright blue and pink mixture of swirling vortices. I could not have downed that bottle faster if I tried.